The radio in the house was still playing the evening news when Grace Peterson vanished from the farming town of Marion, Iowa, population 7,412. September 13, 1959, arrived with a light rain falling over the cornfields along the Cedar River. At 10:47 p.m., gas station attendant Earl Simmons in Ames saw the 22-year-old woman with her boyfriend Brian Lawden stopping to fill up their cream-colored Ford F-100. He overheard them arguing heatedly by the truck. Grace stepped out, arms crossed, standing under the station's awning, staring at the wet road, then returned with red-rimmed eyes. Earl watched them drive off eastward, their taillights fading into the thin rain. The next morning, the truck was found on the roadside, headlights still on, door ajar, and from that moment, Grace Peterson was never seen again. What happened that rainy night would haunt Marion for over half a century. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. September 1959. Marion, a small town in eastern Iowa, was steeped in the humid final days of summer, with cornfields stretching to the horizon and the Cedar River winding like a gray steel ribbon under a heavy sky. In that peaceful setting, Grace Peterson, 22, a recent community college graduate, was preparing to apply for a job in Des Moines. The youngest daughter of a farming family, she was quiet and had a habit of capturing everything with an old Kodak camera her father had given her. That afternoon, Grace left home with her boyfriend, Brian Lawden, a 23-year-old mechanic from Cedar Rapids, telling her mother they were making a short trip to Des Moines, back by morning. They set off in the cream-colored Ford F-100, the truck Grace often used for her photography outings around the area. A witness at the Ames gas station later recalled them stopping to refuel that evening, noting a minor argument. Grace stepped out of the truck for a few minutes before returning, her face pale in the station's lights. After that moment, no one saw Grace again. That night, a light rain fell, wind rustling through the roadside trees, and Highway 30 lay quiet, with only the occasional flicker of headlights reflecting on the wet pavement. The next morning, Grace didn't return, didn't call, and no one heard from her. Her mother, Nicole Peterson, began calling friends, colleagues, and even Brian, but no one knew where she was. By afternoon, unable to wait any longer, Nicole drove along the route her daughter had taken. Near a curve on the highway, at the edge of a cornfield, she spotted the familiar cream-colored Ford F-100. The door was ajar, headlights faintly glowing, the interior empty. Grace's jacket lay on the seat, her Kodak camera still in its usual spot. Nicole stood frozen, calling her daughter's name in vain, then reached for the door, but felt only cold air and the damp smell of gasoline. In that moment, she knew something was deeply wrong. Fear and emptiness gripped her chest as she backed away, trembling, and dialed the Marion police station to report her daughter missing. On the other end of the line, Sheriff Hank Delaney took the call at the Marion County office. He listened as Nicole recounted, haltingly, the abandoned truck on Highway 30, the headlights still on, and no sign of her daughter. He told her to leave everything untouched and wait for officers. After hanging up, Delaney opened his notebook, jotting down the first lines of the case. Missing person report, Grace Peterson, 22, female, left with boyfriend, hasn't returned. He called Deputy Roy Becker, and the two drove south to where the mother waited. That morning, Highway 30 was slick with rain, mist fogging their windshield. When they arrived, Nicole stood beside the cream-colored Ford F-100, her face ashen. The truck's headlights glowed faintly, the driver's side door ajar, and the radio crackled with static, mixed with the sound of the wind. Delaney told Becker to keep his distance and approached slowly. Inside, he saw Grace's leather purse, jacket, wallet, camera, and an open notebook on the passenger seat. There were no signs of a struggle or rummaging. He looked closer, fresh mud streaked across the floor mat from the driver's side to the passenger's on the passenger seat. A faint, dark stain like dried blood. Delaney shone his flashlight, leaned in, and signaled Becker to photograph it. The previous night's rain had turned the surrounding ground to mud, leaving only scattered, indistinct footprints. He circled to the truck's bed. It was still full of items: wool blankets, a lunchbox, a spare gas can, nothing missing. The scene felt as if the occupant had vanished mid-journey, without explanation. Delaney asked the mother tersely, "When did you find the truck?" "Early this morning. I've been waiting here since," she replied, her voice hoarse from cold and fear. He nodded, adding to his notes. "Vehicle found by relative, keys present, headlights on." As Becker finished photographing, Delaney circled the truck, inspecting the road. He noticed a slight skid mark from the right front tire, like a sudden brake, then an abrupt stop. He paused, staring along the wind-bent corn rows, then told Becker, "Tow it to the station. Seal it now." Becker applied evidence seals, cordoned off the door, and covered the truck with a tarp. Nicole was taken to the station for a preliminary statement, while Delaney watched the truck being hitched to the tow. He said nothing, only flipped his notebook, underlining a brief entry. No signs of robbery. No struggle. Need to test the stain on the seat. Possible accident. Voluntary exit, or criminal act. As the tow truck faded into the thin highway mist, Delaney closed his notebook. He knew, from that moment, Grace Peterson's story was no longer just a simple missing person case. The Ford F-100 was towed to the Marion Police Department's garage that afternoon. Delaney authorized crime scene technicians to begin processing it under natural light before dusk. The truck's door was opened carefully, with tarps placed around to preserve evidence. Technicians James O'Neill and Harper handled the collection. They used portable lights to scan every surface, from the steering wheel to the door handles and floor mats. The interior was nearly pristine, with only a few notable traces. On the passenger seat, the dark stain Delaney had spotted at the scene had dried into an irregular shape. O'Neill cut a piece of the seat fabric, sealing it in a labeled glass vial. He also swabbed the stain's edges. On the floor mat, a short blonde hair clung to the rubber groove near the brake pedal. Harper retrieved it with tweezers, sealing it in an evidence envelope with the location and time noted. In the glove compartment, they found gas receipts, a damp handkerchief, and a partially folded Iowa map. All were collected as indirect evidence. When they shone a light on the steering wheel and gear shift, O'Neill spotted clear fingerprints. They photographed them, dusted with aluminum powder, and lifted them with tape. After over 2 hours, the cab was fully photographed, measured, and sampled. The preliminary report noted no signs of forced entry, no foreign objects beyond Grace's personal items. When the samples were sent to the temporary lab, Harper cross-checked initial fingerprints with resident records. Within a day, results confirmed only 2 sets matched, Grace Peterson's and Brian Lawden's. No third-party prints were found. The hair matched Grace's color but couldn't yet be identified. Delaney noted, subject attributes blood to minor accident. No evidence to support. Meanwhile, witness statements from the Ames gas station painted a different picture. A server recalled them arguing outside the truck, hearing Grace say, "Don't touch me anymore," before she went to the restroom. Another confirmed she was crying, while Brian seemed angry. When Delaney raised this, Brian said only, "We argued loudly, that's all." Delaney asked, "Did you leave her alone in the truck?" "Yes, for a few minutes." "Was she still there when you returned?" "Yes. Then she said she wanted to walk." Delaney studied him for a moment, then closed his notebook. He knew pressing further wouldn't change Brian's story. Everything he said was just enough to deflect blame, but not enough to clear himself. After nearly 2 hours, Delaney handed Brian the statement to sign. He signed without reading closely, then stood and asked quietly, "Can I go?" Delaney nodded, saying curtly, "No hold order yet." Brian left, leaving a faint smell of cigarette smoke and an empty chill. Delaney sat back, reviewing Brian's statement alongside Nicole's and the witness reports. The timelines didn't align. The travel route had inconsistencies. If they parted in Ames, why was the truck found miles away in the opposite direction? He underlined a note, possible deception about last location. But he knew, at this point, all suspicions were only on paper. There was no evidence of a crime, no witnesses to violence, and no body. When Becker asked if they should request a search warrant for Brian's home, Delaney shook his head. Not enough grounds. He closed the file, adding a final line to the September 17, 1959 report. Male subject statement contains inconsistencies in time, location, and reason for stopping. Gas station witnesses confirm argument. Insufficient evidence for arrest. Recommend continued monitoring. The morning after, Delaney brought the entire evidence file and Brian's statement to the map room. On the wall, a large Iowa state map was marked with thin red lines connecting towns. He and Deputy Becker began reconstructing Grace and Brian's route on September 13th, based on the collected data. The gas receipt from the truck specified Sinclair Station, Ames, paid at 10:47 p.m. That same day, a witness at the station confirmed seeing the couple leave, heading east, not back toward Marion, as Brian claimed. Delaney drew a red line from Marion to Ames to Des Moines, then added an arrow pointing east, between Ames and Marshalltown. Based on the distance and the receipt's timestamp, the truck must have left the station after 10:50 p.m. and stopped around 11 p.m. at the spot found the next day. If so, Delaney said to Becker, the truck went the opposite direction of what he said. He didn't head back to Marion, he kept going east. Becker noted discrepancy between stated route and confirmed movement. They continued cross-referencing Brian's statement. He claimed Grace left the truck in Ames and he drove straight home. But if true, the truck should have been found southwest, not near Marshalltown. Delaney pointed at the map. See, from Ames to where the truck was, it's at least 40 miles. That means after leaving the station, they were still together. He paused, then asked Becker to calculate the unaccounted time between 9 o'clock p.m., when Brian said they argued, and 11 o'clock p.m., when the receipt was printed. 2 hours with no evidence of their whereabouts. In that gap, only Brian's account existed. Delaney marked a 10-mile radius around the truck's location, noting primary search zone. He requested Iowa State Patrol photos from Highway 30, though he knew the chances of images were slim. To verify further, Becker checked a truck driver's report from that night, who claimed seeing a light-colored Ford F-100 parked on the roadside, lights on, around 11:30 p.m., just half an hour after the gas receipt. This supported the theory that the truck stopped that night, not earlier. Delaney recorded the detail, then circled an additional area along the Cedar River, where small roads led to abandoned farms. He said slowly, "If she left the truck, she couldn't have gone far. Rain, slick roads, and dark like that." Becker nodded silently, marking potential stops or shelters within a 5-mile radius. They reviewed the notes. All data pointed to one conclusion. Brian's statement didn't match the truck's actual movement. On the desk, the map with overlapping red circles became the case's first diagram. Delaney closed his notebook, murmuring as if to himself, "Something happened between Ames and Marshalltown. That's where we need to look." Once the search area was defined, Delaney sent a report to Lynn County and requested additional manpower. On the morning of September 18, 1959, the official search began. 12 local officers, 2 Iowa State Police K-9 units, and over 30 civilian volunteers gathered where the Ford F-100 was found. The sky remained overcast after days of rain, the ground damp, and the wind cold. Delaney pointed to a map on the hood of a car, dividing the group into 3 teams, 1 to comb Highway 30, 1 to search the cornfields, and 1 to follow a drainage ditch parallel to the highway. He instructed, "Look for any trace, clothing, papers, personal items. Don't touch anything suspicious." The area around the truck was quickly trampled by footsteps. Men used wooden poles to probe grass clumps, while the dogs followed the scent of Grace's jacket, brought by her mother. The wind and barking mixed with the clink of shovels hitting stones. One group ventured deep into the cornfield, where the ground dipped low. After nearly an hour, they found an odd item caught on a cornstalk, a white canvas shoe, soaked, matching Grace's usual style. Becker knelt to examine it, noted its position, and marked it with a wooden stake. Nearby, a volunteer shouted. On the ditch bank, among wet grass, they found a handkerchief embroidered with GP in the corner. The white fabric was mud-stained, neatly folded, as if dropped from a pocket. Delaney personally inspected both items, had them photographed, and sealed in plastic bags. He looked at the sluggish ditch water, wondering if it had carried away other clues. That afternoon, the search extended 2 miles east along the Cedar River. A state rescue dive team was called to check deeper sections near an old wooden bridge. The murky, cold water slowed the work, but nothing significant was found. On the bank, local women brought hot coffee for the searchers, speaking in hushed tones to avoid saying Grace's name near her mother, who waited at the road's end. Police collected dozens of items, fabric scraps, faint footprints, stray tire marks, but when checked, all were random, none definitively linked. On the second day, Delaney had a tractor clear more of the northern field, but overnight rain deepened the mud, erasing new traces. He checked his watch. It had been over 4 days since Grace vanished. The men returned to the station with muddy boots, silently hanging their coats in the break room. The day's report was brief. Shoe and handkerchief recovered near drainage ditch. No body located. No sign of struggle or additional trace. Delaney read it, sitting quietly at his desk. He spread out the newly developed photos, the white shoe, the handkerchief, the empty ditch bank. Everything was still, as if the clues were left to mislead. When Becker asked if they should continue the search on day 3, Delaney replied softly, "Keep going, but don't expect much." He knew time and weather had rendered efforts futile. Within a 10-mile radius of the scene, no one saw anything, heard a cry, or noticed an engine stopping in the night. The search paused temporarily that evening as the sun set behind the cornfields horizon. In the report to the county, Delaney wrote a concise conclusion: no body or signs of struggle found, only findings: victim's shoe and handkerchief. Continue monitoring developments. A week after the search paused, lab results from Des Moines arrived at the Marion Police Department. A thick, sealed Iowa State envelope was handed to Delaney. He opened it at his desk. The report, printed on pale yellow paper, smelled faintly of chemicals. The first conclusion made him pause. Blood sample from Ford F-100 passenger seat is type O, matching victim Grace Peterson's blood type. Insufficient basis to identify individual. No foreign substances or traces detected. The lab also returned results on the hair light blonde, consistent with a woman's, but lacking a root for further analysis. Fingerprints lifted from the truck fully matched Grace and Brian Lawden. The report concluded tersely. No evidence of a third party. Delaney set the paper down, feeling the familiar hollowness of an investigator when clues circled back to the start. He had hoped for something different, a trace of a stranger, or a new lead, but all results were partially consistent or insufficient data. That afternoon, Becker brought the returned evidence to storage. Envelopes and sealed bags were neatly arranged on steel shelves. Blood sample, hair, handkerchief, shoe, folded map, gas receipts. Delaney ordered them renumbered and cataloged for long-term storage. He stood in the small room, neon lights casting shadows on peeling paint, reading the red evidence, "Do not remove" labels. Everything was sealed per protocol, but he knew their value, at that moment, was mostly archival. That afternoon, he called the state's chief examiner to ask about identifying the blood sample individually. The voice on the line was calm. "In 1959, we can only determine blood type. We can't confirm an individual match without a direct comparison sample." Delaney thanked him and hung up, knowing he had no other options. His summary report to Lynn County was 2 pages. The first listed findings: blood in truck type O, matching Grace's. No DNA detected. No third-party traces found. No foreign fabric, grease, or shoe prints beyond the owners. Secondary evidence shows no signs of violence. The second page was his professional assessment, evidence collected and preserved fully. Insufficient grounds to establish criminal act. Recommend archiving case. Continue monitoring key witness Brian Lawden. When Becker read it, he looked up and asked, "So dead end?" Delaney didn't answer immediately. He picked up the photo of the bloodstain on the passenger seat, tapping its edge. "No," he said quietly. "We just can't say what it is yet, but that blood didn't appear on its own." Becker nodded, understanding the implication, but also the limits of the evidence. No body, no witnesses. A single bloodstain wasn't enough for charges. The next day, Delaney signed the order to store the evidence. All samples were sealed and moved to a dedicated evidence room filed under Case 59-847. He requested a 10-year retention, longer than standard, citing unresolved suspicious elements in the disappearance. At day's end, after completing the paperwork, Delaney wrote the final line in his work log: "Lab confirms blood type matches victim. Insufficient basis for individual identification. No additional evidence. All samples archived long-term." He closed the notebook, looking through the office's small window at the fading light, the distant fields dry and dotted with wilted corn. Inside, the room was so quiet he could hear Becker's pen scratching as he signed the storage log. Everything seemed temporarily closed. Not because of a conclusion, but because there was nothing more to do. With no new leads from the lab, Delaney turned to investigating Grace and Brian's relationship, hoping for clues from their acquaintances. Over the next week, he and Becker spent most of their time traveling between Marion, Cedar Rapids, and Ames, interviewing friends, co-workers, and neighbors. Each offered fragments, gradually forming a dim picture of the young couple's relationship. At the diner where Grace worked part-time, a co-worker, Janet Moore, said Grace often described her boyfriend as moody but caring. When Delaney pressed, she hesitated, then added, "He was always checking on her, wanted to know where she was, when she'd be back. Once Brian came here, sat in his car for an hour just to drive her home." The story echoed when they met Kathy Reynolds, Grace's community college friend. "Grace told me he didn't like her going out alone, especially with guy friends. She laughed it off, but I think she meant it." Delaney noted each word, underlining controlling time, jealousy. At the boarding house where the couple rented a room briefly that summer, the landlord recalled hearing a loud argument. The girl was crying, and the guy left, slamming the door hard, he said. When asked for the date, he confirmed it was around June, 3 months before Grace vanished. These details didn't prove a crime, but reinforced Delaney's view of ongoing conflict. Becker also spoke to Brian's friends at the Cedar Rapids garage. A former co-worker, Harrison, recalled Brian's irritation when Grace was mentioned. He'd get jealous for no reason. Once she came to pick him up, talked to another mechanic, and Brian went silent all afternoon, then left early. Another said Brian was reprimanded for a scuffle with a co-worker after drinking. Becker noted temper issues, possible jealousy-driven behavior. Summarizing the statements, Delaney saw a clear pattern. Brian was possessive, controlling, and quick to anger when challenged. He submitted a summary to the Lynn County office, proposing a monitoring behavior file for potential criminal records. However, most information was secondhand, insufficient for criminal charges. Meanwhile, Grace's mother provided more personal details. She said that weeks before the trip, Grace seemed restless, mentioning wanting to take a break from Brian. She recalled a late-night call when Grace whispered, "He doesn't understand me, he always wants me to do what he says." Delaney asked if Grace left letters or notes, but she shook her head. Only a few photos and unfinished diary pages remained. Delaney felt all signs pointed one way, but didn't form a straight line. Friends, co-workers, and family described a controlling man, but no one witnessed specific violence. No injuries were documented, no witnesses saw a fight the night of the disappearance. Even the gas station accounts only noted raised voices. That weekend, he reviewed the full case statements, scene photos, lab results, interview reports, all pointed to reasonable suspicion of Brian Lawden, but not enough for an arrest warrant. The law required concrete evidence, and he had only stories and a small, unidentifiable blood stain. In his report to superiors, Delaney wrote, "Witnesses describe a relationship with controlling and jealous elements. Male subject exhibits volatile, unpredictable behavior. However, no grounds for criminal charges of violence or crime. Continue monitoring." When Becker set a coffee cup on the desk, asking if they should call Brian in again, Delaney shook his head slightly. "Nothing new to ask. We'll have to wait." He closed the thick file, looking at the only photo of Grace, taken at her graduation, her eyes bright with hope. Now, everything rested in scattered papers and fragmented accounts, a story full of suspicion, short on proof, and still without answers. 3 months after Grace Peterson vanished, the case file on Hank Delaney's desk had grown nearly 3 inches thick, but it contained only notes, repeated statements, and photos of evidence that offered no answers. In December 1959, winter arrived early, blanketing the fields around Marion in snow, and few still spoke of the young woman who disappeared at summer's end. The search had long stopped. No new witness statements emerged, and the lab confirmed no further testing was possible. Delaney sat in the county office, facing a state police form for classifying cases: missing person, resolved, unresolved. He held his pen, hesitated, then checked the second box. He knew this meant the case would be shelved as unresolved, with no one held accountable and no budget for further investigation. All leads had reached a dead end. On December 10th, his final report was sent to the Lynn County Prosecutor's Office. The bolded conclusion read, "No evidence of a confirmed crime, no direct witnesses, victim still missing, classified as missing person, unresolved." That same day, the Ford F-100 and its evidence were formally transferred to long-term storage. Becker handled the final sealing, affixing red tape labeled Case 59, 847. The blood sample, hair, handkerchief, shoe, and map were placed in separate metal boxes, stored on a high shelf. Delaney watched as the truck was towed into the police warehouse, its cream paint reflecting dim light. He instructed the duty officer, "Keep it as is, no dismantling, no moving without new orders." Then he signed the transfer log, his handwriting neat and straight, but his heart heavy with failure. Around the same time, Brian Lawden left Marion without leaving a clear address. A friend in Cedar Rapids said he wanted out of this place and had applied to enlist. No one knew exactly when he left. Weeks later, military records showed his name among U.S. Army recruits. Delaney received this news calmly, but added a note to his log. Subject relocated out of state, under federal jurisdiction. This meant any further monitoring would require coordination with military authorities. A lengthy process he knew would yield nothing with the case already closed. In the final days of the year, snow fell heavily, and Delaney's office was lit only by a dim desk lamp. He reviewed everything, searching for something overlooked, a receipt, an unverified statement, a small inconsistency. But the more he looked, the more it felt closed in the most frustrating way. No evidence to charge anyone, no grounds to rule out a suspect. Everything was on hold. A copy of the file was stored at the Lynn County office, another sent to the state archives. Delaney's final note was brief. All evidence preserved intact in storage. No new data. Case may be reopened with technological advances or new evidence. Leaving the office that night, he paused at the file cabinet, hand on the drawer labeled PQ. Inside, among hundreds of other files, Grace Peterson sat sealed, its red case number stark on the cover. He closed the drawer, the metal clank sounding like a period. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the lot where the Ford was stored, and Highway 30 faded into silence. Delaney knew for a long time no one would mention the case again. In the years that followed, Case 59-847 sat untouched in Lynn County's storage, on a cold steel shelf among hundreds of other unresolved cases. Grace Peterson's name was forgotten. The local paper's search notices for her survived only as yellowed clippings in the library. In the early 1960s, Delaney occasionally revisited the file on late nights. He still believed one day a clue might surface, perhaps something found along Highway 30. But the case faded from official attention. Budgets for old missing persons cases were cut, and new officers didn't know the young woman who left home and never returned. By 1965, the evidence was moved to a new county storage facility, sealed in metal boxes and relabeled. The Ford F-100 was covered with a tarp, pushed to a corner of the Marion Police Department's garage beside other seized vehicles. Each winter, its paint faded, tires deflated, dust thickened, with only the faint red evidence label visible under fluorescent light. Delaney retired in 1978, after over 30 years in service. In his small home north of town, he kept an old notebook with final notes on the Peterson case. Insufficient evidence. Blood matches victim's type. Truck still in storage. Reopen if better technology emerges. In 1984, he died at 75. No one knows if the notebook was kept or lost among his personal papers. In the 1990s, as Iowa updated its storage system, all old case files were transferred to the State Archive in Cedar Rapids. Grace's file was sealed in Box 214B, under Missing Person 1950 to 1960. It was no longer referenced. New generations of officers knew it, only from periodic case lists. One case unresolved. Last update 1959. Time passed, witnesses aged, some left the state, others died. The Peterson family grew quiet. Nicole, Grace's mother, moved to live with relatives in Dubuque and died in the early 1980s. In county records, Grace's name was just an old data entry, female age 22, missing last seen Highway 30. By the 21st century, Lynn County's archives were partially digitized. Some prominent cases were reviewed for DNA testing, but Grace's wasn't prioritized. No reinvestigation requests came, no complainants pushed, and no one noticed evidence gathering dust for over half a century. From 1960 to 2011, the Grace Peterson case lived quietly in administrative records, unassigned, without victim heirs or reminders. On a high shelf in the State Archive, the metal box sat, containing hardened samples, a blood-stained fabric scrap, a blonde hair, and a faded gas receipt. In Marion, Highway 30, where it all began, stretched through cornfields, with no marker noting a young woman vanished there without explanation. In March 2012, over half a century after Grace Peterson's disappearance, Marion remained a quiet Iowa community, now with sparse subdivisions and new paved roads replacing cornfields. St. Joseph's Church at 7th and Central was set for renovation after nearly 80 years. Workers dismantled the old basement wall to replace water pipes. When laborer Rick Coleman struck a cracked brick with a hammer, he heard a hollow sound. A harder hit broke the brick, revealing a small mortar-lined cavity. Inside, covered in dust and cobwebs, was a rectangular tin box, the kind used for 1950s cookies. Coleman handed the box to the site manager. Its rusted lid, stuck tight, required a screwdriver to pry open. Inside were 3 items: a black and white photo of a young couple by an old pickup truck, a small gray cloth with a dried brown stain, and a folded handwritten note in faded blue ink. In the photo, the manager recognized the old church logo in the background, with Ames 1959 faintly written in the corner. The woman had blonde hair, wore a light dress. The man beside her in a white shirt stared at the camera. No one in the group knew them. When the note was unfolded, its scrawled lines read, "She fell. I didn't want her to hurt. God forgive me." No signature, just shaky, hurried writing. The group exchanged looks, silent. The manager immediately called local police. Marion police sent 2 officers to the scene, sealing the tin and its contents, photographing the discovery site. Their initial report noted, metal tin, unidentified objects, containing photo and documents possibly tied to an old case. Potential historical or criminal value. When the find was reported to the county chief's office, the duty officer checked the system and noted a striking coincidence. St. Joseph's Church was less than a mile from where Grace Peterson's Ford was found in 1959. After cross-referencing the photo's Ames 1959 date, police confirmed a potential link to the Grace Peterson missing person case, an unresolved file from that year. The evidence was promptly transferred to the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, DCI, in Des Moines for review. At DCI, the tin was reopened in a forensic lab. Experts confirmed the paper and ink were from the late 1950s, consistent with the case's era. The photo was scanned at high resolution and compared to old file images. Preliminary results. The woman matched Grace Peterson's graduation photo from case 59-847. The man resembled Brian Lawden, her boyfriend. The blood-stained cloth was sampled for DNA analysis. The transfer report between Marion Police and DCI noted, date received, March 14, 2012. Evidence, metal tin, photograph, blood-stained cloth, handwritten note. Origin, found in St. Joseph's Church basement wall, Marion, Iowa. Purpose, forensic examination, verify connection to case 59-847. The discovery wasn't publicized. Within the agency, older staff recalled Grace Peterson's name from the state's cold case list, but none expected a find after over 50 years. At the Cedar Rapids archive, the old file was retrieved, along with descriptions of the Ford F-100 and its evidence. Placing the new tin beside the yellowed 1959 envelopes, it was the first time since then that the Grace Peterson case had tangible new clues. The final transfer report to the DCI director concluded briefly, newly discovered evidence likely directly tied to Grace Peterson's disappearance. Recommend forensic review and verification of individuals in the photograph. After decades of silence, items buried in a small church's wall had inadvertently reopened a case time seemed to have erased. When the St. Joseph's tin reached the Iowa DCI, the Special Investigations Director assigned a dedicated officer. The order, signed March 19, 2012, stated, assign investigator Maria Fulton, Cold Case Unit, to review and verify newly discovered evidence related to case 59-847. Maria Fulton, 45, a state expert in old cases, had experience recovering and analyzing evidence from mid-century cases. Upon receiving the thick file, she noted, missing 1959, victim Grace Peterson, physical evidence still intact. First, Fulton requested all original evidence from the Cedar Rapids archive be brought to Des Moines. On March 23, the 1959 sealed metal boxes were placed on her desk, red labels still clear with evidence, do not remove. Inside, the blood, hair, and gas receipts remained preserved in glass vials, undamaged. Storage reports confirmed stable temperatures, suitable for modern DNA testing. Fulton and a forensic team unsealed the items with 2 independent witnesses present. Each sample was photographed, assigned new DCI codes, G5901, G5902, G5903. The 2012 tin items were coded G1201 to G1203. All were sent to Iowa's DNA lab for identification and cross-comparison. While awaiting results, Fulton reviewed the 1959 file. She noted key details, type O blood, fingerprints matching Grace and Brian, inconsistent travel timeline statements, and stored evidence. In Delaney's old log, she found a handwritten note, if better technology emerges, reopen. The brief line made her pause, realizing his half-century-old prediction was now reality. A week later, the lab returned initial results. The 8-page report confirmed DNA from the 1959 blood sample, G5901, and the 2012 cloth, G1202, matched perfectly. Crucially, this DNA matched a sample from Anna Holbrook, Grace Peterson's niece in Minnesota, who participated in a missing relatives database. The match probability was 99.9999%, the highest statistical certainty. This was the first legal confirmation that the blood in the 1959 Ford belonged to Grace Peterson. Fulton underlined the conclusion, blood and cloth samples share the same origin, DNA identified as Grace Peterson's. She drafted a report to the DCI director, requesting case reactivation. Approved that day, it concluded, Case 59-847, reopened as a criminal investigation. Lead investigator, Maria Fulton. Fulton then coordinated with Marion police. Younger officers were largely unaware of the case. Many heard Grace Peterson's name for the first time. She requested they verify the Ford F-100's location, still sealed in storage. Meanwhile, forensics examined the tin's handwritten note. The ink was identified as Parker Quink, common in the late 1950s, the paper consistent with local stationery. Though vague, its content was the first direct evidence suggesting possible guilt. On April 2, 2012, Fulton submitted her first summary report in 3 parts. 1. DNA results, confirmed blood source as Grace Peterson. 2. Evidence integrity, 1959 samples intact, forensically viable. 3. Recommendation. Resume investigation, verify Brian Lawden's role and the tin's discovery site connections. Signing as investigator in charge, Fulton knew the state's oldest cold case was officially revived. After over 50 years in the archive shadows, Grace Peterson's disappearance was listed on DCI's active board, with a brief but weighty note, reopened. Evidence DNA match confirmed. In mid-April 2012, at Maria Fulton's request, the cream-colored Ford F-100 was moved from Lynn County storage after over half a century under dust. Transported by a specialized tow to Iowa's Forensic Center, it was overseen by DCI and 2 legal witnesses. Its condition was surprisingly good, faded paint, flat tires, some interior decay, but structurally intact. The windshield still bore the 1959 seal with Hank Delaney's faint signature. Unsealing followed modern protocol. The process was recorded. Staff wore protective gear, and all actions were logged digitally. Fulton stood by as technicians removed the tarp. She noted, vehicle intact, unmoved since storage. Seal valid. Inside dust coated everything like fine ash. The passenger seat still showed the cut fabric from the original sample, now re-examined under bright white light. Technicians scanned surfaces with UV light. On the seat's leather, a glowing stain pattern confirmed old blood traces. A new swab was taken, coded G59R1. Fluorescent powder was sprayed on the dashboard and door handles, revealing faint fingerprint patterns, 2 types, one small and delicate, one larger and bolder. Each print was digitally photographed and processed through DCI's automated matching software, cross-referenced with the 1959 archived fingerprints. The results showed a perfect match between the old and new samples, proving the truck hadn't been tampered with since its initial seizure. Notably, the larger fingerprints on the steering wheel and driver's door handle matched Brian Lawden's civil records, while all others belonged to Grace Peterson. No third-party prints were found. When analyzing the bloodstain with DNA quantification, the results confirmed a complete match with Grace's previously identified DNA. The blood volume indicated a genuine injury, not a mere scratch. Histological analysis showed the stain had seeped deeply into the seat fabric, formed by continuous bleeding while seated, not a small drip. The report stated, pattern consistent with bleeding from wound under limited movement, possible incapacitation. Additionally, technicians found faint circular marks on the inside of the door, about 40 centimeters high, resembling impacts from a head or shoulder. Analysis of the impact angle and blood position suggested Grace was likely injured inside the truck, not outside. Tiny fiber fragments around the marks were sampled, identified as cotton matching the material of Grace's shirt in old photos. Fulton compiled the results, organizing them chronologically. She placed detailed photos of the passenger seat beside the 1959 crime scene diagram, redrawing the relative positions of the driver's seat, door, and floor mat. The modern diagram showed a clear sequence. The person on the right was injured, blood dripped to the floor, then the door opened, and the driver exited calmly, no signs of a chaotic struggle. From this, she made an initial assessment, Victim Grace Peterson was injured while in the vehicle. No evidence suggests she left consciously. The technical report was submitted to DCI in late April. In its conclusion, Fulton wrote, "Blood-stained DNA matches Grace Peterson, indicating injury occurred in the vehicle. Fingerprints, only Grace and Brian Lawden's, ruling out a third party. Physical evidence. Interior impact marks suggest a struggle or strong collision. Overall assessment, victim bled in the vehicle, likely did not leave the scene of her own volition." The report was signed by 3 divisions: forensics, criminal, and investigation. As Fulton closed the file, she knew the old Ford, once dismissed as scrap, was now the case's centerpiece. After over 50 years, it was no longer just evidence, but the only surviving crime scene, revealing what 1959's tools couldn't. Grace Peterson was harmed there and never had a chance to leave on her own. After the Ford F-100 analysis was complete, Maria Fulton spent weeks reconstructing Grace Peterson and Brian Lawden's journey on the night of September 13, 1959. She arranged the original file, gas receipts, witness statements, and new physical evidence on a large digital board. Each detail, from the receipt's timestamp, the truck's location, to the cab's traces, was placed precisely. A picture emerged. They left Marion at 6 p.m., headed west to Ames, stopped for gas around 10:47 p.m., and left eastward. The truck was found on Highway 30, about 40 miles from the station. The time gap, between 10:50 and 11:30 p.m., when a truck driver saw the vehicle parked with lights on, remained the central mystery. Fulton requested DCI's technical team to retrieve 1959 topographic maps and aerial images of Highway 30. Though blurry, modern software pinpointed the exact curve where the truck was abandoned, near Central Avenue, less than a mile from St. Joseph's Church. Zooming into the map, she spotted a faint note in the original file's margin. Brian Lawden's mother, Martha Lawden, part-time work at St. Joseph, 1958-1960. Previously overlooked, this became the first link between the old evidence and the new find. Fulton checked parish personnel records. The church's archive confirmed Martha Lawden worked as an office assistant and basement cleaner during that period. The tin box with the photo and cloth, found in the church's basement wall, made the connection undeniable. Fulton's internal report noted, location of vehicle and site of box discovery are within 1 mile radius. Historical connection. Subject's mother, employed at same church at relevant time period. From this, Fulton reconstructed a detailed timeline. 18 o'clock, Grace and Brian left Marion. 21:30, brief stop at a diner near Ames, confirmed by a witness. 22:47, fueled at Sinclair Station, Ames, witnesses heard them arguing. 23:10, 23:20. Truck moved east, between Ames and Marshalltown. 23:30. Truck seen parked on roadside by a truck driver, lights on. Next morning, Mrs. Peterson found the truck, Grace missing. Mapping these points, Fulton saw the route wasn't random. The eastward path, toward Marion, stopped near the church where Brian's mother worked, minutes from town. If Brian said they parted in Ames, she noted, why did the truck stop here, near his family's connection? Fulton had the crime scene map, digitized, layering new data, the tin's location, truck's route, and evidence timestamps. The aligned data formed a coherent pattern. All points, gas station, truck location, church, formed a near straight line south of Marion, deviating by just a few miles. This suggested the truck's movement was deliberate. She compared Brian's statement to the new map. He claimed he headed home after Ames, but the proven route showed the truck continued southeast, directly toward the church area. The 20 to 30-minute gap allowed time to stop at a secluded spot, aligning with the forensic conclusion of Grace's injury. In her report to the DCI director, Fulton wrote, Bolston-Pine 1959-2012 data indicates 1. Victim was injured in the vehicle, likely between 23 o'clock, 23:30, 2. Truck stopping point is less than 1 mile from St. Joseph's Church. At that time, suspect Brian Lawden's mother worked at the church, coinciding with the 2012 tin discovery site. 4. Reasonable basis to assume evidence was hidden there post-incident. Fulton taped a note to the map's corner, "Everything leads back to St. Joseph." She stared at the Ford's photo under the lab's white light, the only witness silent since 1959, and felt the boundary between past and present shift. Small, once meaningless details were forming a line. The path Grace took on her final night ended, where half a century later, the mysterious tin was found. From the coincidences linking the truck, St. Joseph's Church, and Brian's mother's employment, Maria Fulton delved into the parish's personnel records. She accessed old ledgers, yellowed pages in black ink, listing workers from 1958, 1961. In the September 1959 log, she found Martha Lawden, basement assistant, cleaning south wall repairs. A checkmark noted, completed, signed September 28, just 15 days after Grace's disappearance was reported. The work was verified by the then pastor, now deceased. A small note in different ink at the page's bottom read, "Retains basement key until water pipe replacement." These details perfectly matched the 2012 tin's discovery site, the basement wall repaired during that period. Fulton retrieved Martha Lawden's civil records. Born 1916 in Marion, widowed early, she had one son, Brian Lawden. They lived 4 blocks from the church. Records showed that in 1960, Martha sold the house and moved to Cedar Rapids, then to Nebraska, where she died in 1979. She had no recorded violations. Comparing her move from Marion to the disappearance timeline, Fulton noted it was just over a year, enough time to settle affairs after her son enlisted. Her internal report stated, "Possible presence at the tin's hiding site. Wall repair coincides with case timeline. Verify reasons and materials used." Fulton and a technician surveyed St. Joseph's 6. The wall, where the tin was found, bore older, discolored cement compared to the rest. The current caretaker said the wall was patched before the 1960s during plumbing updates. They found a 1959 materials receipt in the church archive: Portland cement, red bricks, waterproof paint, billed to Martha Lawden, paid in cash. This was the only document proving her access to the basement when Brian left town. Fulton noted, "Financial evidence confirms Martha Lawden purchased materials and performed basement wall repairs, 3rd week of September 1959. Fulton then sought co-workers of Martha's at the parish. An elderly woman, Helen Cross, a former office assistant, recalled, "Martha was quiet, kind. After the girl's disappearance, she took time off, then returned to fix the wall, saying it had a water leak." Helen said Martha arrived early, carrying an old metal box for screws. When pressed, Helen noted she never saw the box again after the wall was finished. Fulton paused, underlining, "Metal box, not seen after wall completion." DCI technicians compared cement samples from the tin site to church storage materials. The mineral composition matched, high calcium, specific silica, from 1959. Cedar Rapids Portland cement. This strengthened the theory that the tin was hidden during Martha's wall repair. Fulton hypothesized, on September 13th night, after the incident, Brian returned to Marion in panic and told his mother something. Maternal instinct may have led her to hide evidence or related items in a space she controlled. The next day, or soon after, she went to the church, requested to repair the wall, and hid the tin containing the photo, cloth, and brief confession. No one knew their exact exchange, but the timeline aligned. In her May report to DCI, Fulton wrote, Martha Lawden worked at St. Joseph's 1958-1960, handled basement during the disappearance. Physical evidence proves she repaired the basement wall in mid-September 1959. Tin was found in that wall. Professional hypothesis: Martha Lawden likely hid the tin to conceal evidence related to her son. The report ended with Fulton's note, "No evidence suggests Martha Lawden was directly involved, but her role in hiding or destroying evidence afterward is clear. Recommend verifying the mother-son connection and post-incident actions." Leaving St. Joseph's that day, Fulton looked at the newly painted basement wall that had concealed evidence for over half a century. She knew those bricks, though silent, said more than any statement in the file. In a 1959 autumn afternoon, someone chose to keep their son's secret within the church's stone walls, and that secret was now cracking open. With Martha Lawden's investigation concluded, Maria Fulton shifted focus to the only living person from the case, Brian Lawden, her son. Civil records showed him, now 76, living in Omaha, Nebraska, retired after years as an assistant pastor at a local church. DCI sent an official request to the Nebraska Bureau of Investigation and Omaha Police to verify his identity, residence, and health. Within 2 days they confirmed Brian Lawden, born 1936 in Marion, Iowa, widowed, lived alone in a small house in West Omaha's suburbs. Neighbors described him as calm, reclusive, walking daily to a nearby park, occasionally teaching at the church. No one knew his past tied to an unresolved disappearance. Fulton obtained a legal covert surveillance order. A DCI team monitored him in Omaha for 3 weeks, tracking routines, routes, and household trash. The goal was to collect indirect DNA without contact. On June 14, 2012, agents recovered a disposable plastic cup and a cigarette butt Brian discarded at a park bin. The items were sealed and sent to DCI's Des Moines lab. Results came in under 10 days. The cigarette's DNA fully matched the Ford F-100 in blood-stained cloth samples. The match probability was 99.9999997%. This was the first scientific confirmation that Brian Lawden was in the truck when the victim was injured, not just an incidental boyfriend, but the last person with Grace Peterson when she was alive. Fulton read the results in silence. The line, "full match, identical source," signaled a half-century circle closing. She drafted a preliminary prosecution report outlining 1. Suspect's DNA matches crime scene samples from 1959. 2. New evidence and context suggest the suspect's relative hid evidence. 3. Suspect was the last to see the victim. Prior statements contradict physical evidence. On June 26, Fulton submitted the file to Iowa's prosecutor. A closed meeting in Des Moines, attended by DCI representatives, the chief prosecutor, and a forensic expert, agreed the DNA evidence was strong enough for an arrest warrant. The prosecutor noted reasonable grounds to believe Brian Lawden was directly involved in Grace Peterson's death in Iowa, 1959. On June 29, a federal arrest warrant was issued, titled State of Iowa v. Brian A. Lawden, preliminary charge, first-degree murder or causing injury resulting in death. Fulton coordinated with the Nebraska Bureau and Omaha Police to plan the arrest. Given the suspect's age and health, they chose early morning to avoid attention. At 6:45 a.m. on July 3, 2012, 2 unmarked police cars parked outside a pale green wooden house on Maple Street. As Brian took out his trash, 3 agents approached, identified themselves, and read the warrant. He stood still, unresisting, asking softly, "Is this about Grace?" Fulton, present at the scene, met his gaze and confirmed. Her arrest report noted, subject cooperative, no resistance, displayed calm demeanor, understood warrant's content. A preliminary search found an old Bible in a living room drawer, its inside cover faintly inscribed, "God forgive what happened." Brian was taken to Omaha Police for initial questioning. He didn't deny his relationship with Grace, but refused further answers without a lawyer. Meanwhile, forensics collected additional items from his home, clothing, a toothbrush, a fruit knife, for DNA comparison, all confirming the same genetic source as the truck samples. On July 5, Fulton held a closed DCI press briefing. She outlined the case from the tin's discovery to DNA results, from 1959's inconsistent statements to the mother-son connection. On screen, the Ford F-100's image sat beside the tin's black and white photo, silencing the room. She concluded, "We've solved a 53-year-old case thanks to 2 drops of blood and a memory hidden behind a stone wall." On July 10, Brian Lawden was extradited to Iowa. On the drive, he sat quietly in the back, hands on his knees, staring out the window. Reporters didn't learn of the arrest until the prosecutor's office issued a brief statement. A 76-year-old man has been charged in connection with Grace Peterson's 1959 disappearance. Arrest warrant executed. Investigation ongoing. Fulton returned to her Des Moines office, writing the final prosecution report line. Brian Lawden's DNA matches Ford F-100 samples. Evidence confirms his presence when the victim was injured. Scientific and physical evidence sufficient for arrest warrant. She signed, then looked at Grace's photo on her desk, a blonde girl with a bright smile from her graduation, and whispered, barely audible, "We finally found him." 3 days after his arrest, Brian Lawden agreed to meet Maria Fulton again in a DCI Des Moines interrogation room. He sat quietly, hands clasped, eyes weary. When Fulton asked if he wanted to share anything about that September 1959 night, he stared at the table for a long moment, then said slowly, "If I tell you, you won't let them dig there." Under the willows by the Cedar River, where the old wooden bridge used to be. The room fell silent. Fulton asked him to confirm the location. He nodded, elaborating, "About 50 yards from the old bridge, where there's a low spot once a boat landing. I dug about 4 feet deep." His statement was recorded, accompanied by a shaky hand-drawn map, marking the spot with an X. That afternoon, Fulton organized an emergency excavation team with Lynn County Police. The site was pinpointed on the west bank of the Cedar River, south of Marion, once an abandoned farmland now overgrown with trees. Using 1959 maps and GPS, they located the area where Brian mentioned an old wooden bridge, demolished in the 1970s. Under early July sunlight, the area was cordoned with yellow tape. Forensic experts set up a tent, installed lighting, and mounted cameras to record the process. On the morning of July 14, 2012, excavation began. The soil was thick and damp, smelling of river mud and decayed leaves. After over 2 hours of digging in the direction Brian described, a technician spotted a light-colored fabric protruding from the clay. Carefully brushing around it, revealed a small, round bone resembling a human wrist. Fulton halted the work, marked the GPS coordinates, and called in the forensic team. Layers of earth were meticulously removed, uncovering a human skeleton, curled naturally on its side. Nearby was a rotted leather strap, remnants of a handbag containing a wooden comb, a metal button, and a faded photo of a young woman on a porch. Inscribed on the back, Grace, summer 1958. When excavation concluded, nearly the entire skeleton was recovered, intact enough for identification of sex and age. Near the skull was a 6-centimeter crack, sharply fractured. Forensic experts suggested it indicated a severe blow from a hard object. All remains were sent to Iowa's State Forensic Lab for detailed analysis. Soil samples around the body were taken to date the burial. The preliminary report noted, identified female skeleton, consistent with age 20-25, buried at 120 centimeters depth, 46 meters from the Cedar River. Estimated time since burial, 50-55 years. Fulton was present when technicians opened the evidence bag with the jawbone. A metal filling on the front teeth matched Grace Peterson's dental records from her old dentist. She knew, even before DNA results, identification was nearly certain. Days later, official tests confirmed the femur's DNA fully matched Grace's from the relative database. The report stated, remains positively identified as Grace Peterson, missing since September 1959. The forensic lab continued analyzing the cause of death. Based on the skull and fractured shoulder bone, they determined a direct forceful blow from behind caused a temporal bone fracture and intracranial bleeding, leading to immediate death. No knife or bullet marks were found. Cause of death, traumatic brain injury from direct impact. Manner, homicide. The blood-stained cloth from the tin also matched the DNA from the truck and bones, confirming continuity between the crime scene and burial site. Fulton compiled all findings, DNA, excavation location, personal items, forensic conclusions. Comparing them to the reconstructed travel map, she noted the 2-mile distance between the truck's location and the remains, easily traversable that night. The blood in the truck, the tin's location, the truck stop near the church, formed a logical chain. Grace was injured in the vehicle, died soon after. Brian buried her near the river, then returned home. His mother, Martha, hid the remaining evidence. On July 20th afternoon, Fulton visited the riverside site where forensics had finished and refilled the pit. She stood quietly, watching the cedar's slow flow, sunlight reflecting on its surface, thinking of the 53 years the case lay in darkness. Back at the office, she signed the excavation summary report, its final line reading, Grace Peterson's remains located and identified via DNA. Head injury consistent with death by severe impact. Physical evidence confirms intentional criminal act. The next day, Iowa's prosecutor announced the discovery and confirmed cause of death strengthened the prosecution's case. Police held a public press conference confirming the 1959 missing person was found after over half a century. Images of the old Ford F-100, rusted tin, and Cedar River bank appeared on screen, the final pieces of a long story. For Fulton, the case wasn't just closed by forensics, but by restoring someone forgotten. Her final forensic note was brief. Grace Peterson, located, identified, and finally brought home. Brian Lawden's trial began April 17, 2013, in Lynn County Courthouse, Iowa, over 53 years after Grace Peterson's disappearance. The courtroom was packed, not from curiosity, but because Marion's residents wanted closure for a case haunting the town for half a century. In the front row, Grace's two nieces sat quietly, holding hands. On the prosecution table, Maria Fulton placed the rusted tin in a glass case beside DNA sample copies, the old photo, and a blood-stained cloth fragment. Once buried, these now spoke for the lost. Brian entered, frail, leaning on a cane, white hair thinning. In a gray shirt, collar buttoned, his calm eyes suggested readiness for this moment. When the judge asked if he pleaded guilty, he replied softly, "No, Your Honor, I didn't kill her." Prosecutor Rebecca Cole opened simply, "This case isn't just about a man and a woman. It proves justice never expires, even after half a century." Fulton testified first, as the lead investigator, recounting the process, the 2012 tin discovery, DNA analysis, body excavation, and Brian's sample match. On screen, 1959 crime scene photos were juxtaposed with 2012 excavation images, same road, 2 miles between truck and burial. Pointing to the diagram, Fulton said, "Science connected what people missed." She asserted, "All evidence points to one thing: Grace was injured in the truck, died soon after, and her body was buried deliberately by the driver." Next, forensic experts presented findings. DNA from the truck, cloth, and tin matched Grace Peterson. Brian's cigarette DNA matched traces in the cab. The skull analysis confirmed death by brain trauma from a hard object's impact. The prosecutor asked, "Mr. Lawden, can you explain why Grace's blood was in your truck?" Brian replied, "She fell during our argument. I tried to help, but she passed out. I panicked." "Why didn't you call for help?" "No phone. It was dark. I didn't know what to do." "So you chose to bury her by the river?" Brian went silent, staring at his trembling hands. The defense argued it wasn't intentional murder but manslaughter, claiming Brian, then 23, panicked and didn't understand his actions. They cited his age, heart condition, and decades past to request leniency. The prosecution countered, "He didn't just leave an injured girl, he buried her body, lied for 50 years, let his mother hide evidence in a church. That's not innocence." Over 4 days, the court reviewed the evidence chain, DNA results, witness statements, Sheriff Delaney's 1959 notes, and the tin's note. "She fell. I didn't want her to hurt. God forgive me." Handwriting experts confirmed a 95% match with Brian's youthful letters. "Asked about it," he said. "It might be mine. I wrote to God, not the police." On day 5, Fulton testified again, concluding her investigation, speaking slowly, addressing the jury, not the defendant. "If I'm certain of one thing, It's that Grace Peterson didn't leave that truck of her own will. She had no chance for help, no hospital, no proper burial. The only person who could have changed that was Brian Lawden. During closing arguments, Prosecutor Cole summarized, "Scientific evidence doesn't lie. DNA doesn't age. The blood, cloth, truck's location, tin, all tell one story. Grace's life was taken not by accident, but by the choice of the man beside her." The defense pleaded for compassion, noting Brian's upright life and late confession. The prosecution argued his confession came only when DNA evidence was undeniable. "That's not remorse," Cole said. "It's surrender." The trial lasted 7 days. On April 23, 2013, the jury found Brian Lawden guilty of second-degree manslaughter and concealing a body. Combined sentence, 25 years. Hearing the verdict, Brian nodded slightly, muttering what sounded like a prayer. In closing remarks, a Peterson family representative said, "We're no longer angry, just grateful Grace was found. She lay in the ground too long, and now the truth is acknowledged." The judge responded, "No justice comes on time, but it comes." In this case, it arrived over half a century late. Post-trial, Brian was sent to Iowa's State Correctional Facility, monitored for chronic heart issues. He rarely interacted, spending time writing to the warden about wanting to see the Cedar River again before dying. Fulton never met him again, but noted in an internal report, "Defendant cooperative, non-resistant, psychologically stable but depressed. Seems to accept the sentence as a natural end." In October 2013, Case 59-847 was officially closed. At a small DCI ceremony, the state director signed an order transferring all case evidence to the Iowa Justice and Police Museum for display as a model cold case. The Ford F-100, restored and sealed in humidity-controlled glass, was placed in the Forensic Breakthroughs section with a plaque, "Grace Peterson. Case, 1959-2013. Justice after 53 years. Beside it were the tin black and white photo and a notes copy. As the ceremony ended, Fulton stood quietly before the truck, light reflecting off its faded paint. She touched the glass, not for achievement, but feeling a young woman who sat there had regained her voice after half a century. In her final report to Iowa's Justice Department, she wrote, "DNA and physical evidence provided the final resolution for Grace Peterson's disappearance. The suspect is criminally accountable. The file is archived as a testament to forensic progress and justice's enduring value." In November 2013, local papers ran a simple headline, "Cold Case Solved. After 53 years, Marion finally finds peace." Townsfolk said that passing the museum, they often paused at the Ford F-100, a symbol of a time when truth was buried and a reminder that no secret stays beneath Iowa's quiet soil forever. Grace Peterson's case isn't just a tragedy of a young Iowa woman in 1959, but reflects issues persisting in American society, especially relationship violence, victim silence, and community responsibility. Grace faced control and jealousy from her boyfriend, but like many women then, she lacked the language or support to recognize a toxic relationship. Her death, hidden for over half a century, was revealed only through DNA technology and investigators like Maria Fulton delivering belated justice. But the bigger question is, how many other Grace Petersons exist in our towns, colleges, or neighborhood? Martha Lawden's hiding of the tin to protect her son reveals another facet of silence culture. Families and communities sometimes shield out of shame or fear, avoiding truth. In modern America, with movements like #MeToo and End Domestic Violence, this story reminds us justice isn't just for police or courts. It starts with believing and listening to victims when they speak. If there's a lesson, it's that truth always finds a way, whether in 5 or 50 years. Technology can recover evidence, but more vital is building a society where no one waits half a century to be believed. Iowa in 1959 may have been silent, but America today can and must be different. Thank you for following Grace Peterson's journey to its end. Proof that justice may come late, but never vanishes. If you're interested in true stories from America's cold case files, subscribe to the channel to explore more secrets buried by time in our next video.